when I was 13, I had a babysitter that would come by once a week, as my mom would work late every Saturday night. I always thought I was too old to have a babysitter still, and hated having to have someone watch over me all the time. The main person my mom would have over was this 20-year-old guy named Tomas. He was the son of one of my mom's work friends, I guess. This guy was really weird though, and I didn't like him at all. He didn't talk much and acted really awkward and strange. It's hard to describe. Whenever he interacted with my mom though, he was always extra nice and very talkative. I tried to bring up his weird behavior with her, but she would always say I was just trying to get rid of him so I could stay home alone. Anyway, it was a normal Saturday night, and Tomas had just arrived a little late. As usual, my mom talked with him for a little while, then headed out to work. I walked over to the couch and turned on my Xbox to play some video games and try to pass the time away. I usually go to bed at 10 or so I'd have to spend 4 or 5 hours with Tomas. Most of the time, I'd find something to do alone. He never really talked to me anyway, and would just kind of hang around in the kitchen or in our loft area. Today was no different really. He was just hanging around in the kitchen for a while. After a few minutes though, I started to hear what sounded like him talking to someone. I tried to listen in as best I could, but I couldn't quite make out anything he was saying. The kitchen was right behind the living room that I was in, but he was talking really quietly. This went on for a few minutes, then the talking stopped altogether. That was followed by him coming into the living room and standing next to the couch. I looked up at him and saw he was holding his phone. Tomas said someone was going to come over for just a second and not to worry about anything. I didn't really know how to respond, other than just to say okay. It was pretty weird though, and I knew it was definitely not something a babysitter should be doing. I also knew there was nothing I could really do about it myself though. The next 20 minutes were really awkward, as he didn't take out his phone or anything. He just sat there on the couch with me, looking around and not saying a single word. He would usually rarely ever try to be in the same room as me, so this was pretty out of the ordinary for him. Our living room was right by the front door though, so I guess he was just waiting for that person to get there. Eventually, a car did pull into the driveway, and a man came knocking at the door. Tomas shot up and went over to the door, then stood right in front of it for a moment, before turning and telling me he'd be back in just a minute. He opened the door and walked outside, then shut the door behind him. This whole situation had me very curious as to what was going on. The blinds on the windows were cracked open just enough for me to peek outside and see the two shadows as they moved around in the driveway. I could tell the man handed Tomas a large bag, then got in his car and drove away. A few seconds later, I heard the lid of the garbage can outside slamming shut, followed by Tomas coming back inside through the front door. Something about this whole situation seemed very odd. I couldn't help myself from asking what the hell this was all about. He replied by telling me it was just his friend, and he'd left his wallet at his friend's house last night. He was only coming over to drop it off for him. Something about the way he answered made me feel uncomfortable. That also didn't explain the large bag I'd seen him holding just a few moments ago. I didn't feel safe questioning him any further though, so I just said okay and went back to playing my game. Things started to get more strange though as the night progressed onward. During the next hour, I could hear Tomas having multiple phone calls with people in the kitchen. At one point, he went to the far loft area where I could hear him raising his voice quite intensely. I still couldn't make out what he was saying though. After the 5th or 6th call, the same car from earlier pulled into the driveway again. Tomas immediately ran outside without saying anything. I could tell from the body language and the way they were moving around that they were clearly arguing about something. Tomas left for 30 seconds, then came back with the bag from earlier. The man took it and put it in his back seat, then drove off in a hurry. He came back inside, and I could see frustration all over his face. He went over to the kitchen and didn't come back until 10, when he told me to just go to bed. I got myself ready and laid down, while Tomas stayed downstairs. He would usually stay until my mom got home at 12, but just a few moments later I heard the front door open and close. I waited for 10 minutes, then got up and went downstairs to see if he was still there. Sure enough, he was nowhere to be seen. I looked out the window and his car was gone too. I stayed up in bed for a few hours to wait for my mom to get home, then told her everything that happened. She seemed to believe me this time. She also thought it was strange and very unprofessional to leave the house before she came home. The next day, she tried to call him, but he didn't answer on any of his contact information. Eventually, she got a hold of her friend who was Tomas's mom and asked what happened. She said that he'd gone home feeling sick. We both knew that was a complete lie and didn't make much sense at all. Anyway, it's been almost 10 years since all that happened, and I still find myself thinking how weird that night was. I always wonder what the two were arguing about and why he just left me there in a hurry. What was in that bag, too? I'm a 28-year-old woman who tried out OnlyFans for a short period of time. Yeah, I know, but my husband and I thought it would be fun to spice things up and make a little bit of money at the same time together. I signed up using a nickname, of course, and didn't put my location. No personal information on any of the sites, so I didn't really think it was a big deal. Plus, I only did it for a few months anyway. I'm not really huge into social media, so navigating Reddit and Twitter and all that was a bit of a struggle for me. My parents were always overly cautious on social media and always imparted on me the dangers inherent to it. I wasn't allowed on it very much either. Because of this, I was really sheltered from a lot of the coming of age, so to speak, stories of the kids from our generation talking to strangers online. Eventually, I found a niche subreddit to try and promote myself and get reactions to my OnlyFans. I had posted some fantasies and things on there, so I could try and do a little bit of promoting. Little did I know I would attract some very bad things. I had only posted a few times on that subreddit, and I had my DMs off. I only replied to a couple of comments before getting pretty bored. I didn't really like being on there, to be honest. Reddit can be a very depressing place. I wasn't really liking the way I was being treated on there, and I wasn't getting any traction anyway. I deleted my Reddit, my Twitter, and our OnlyFans. Months go by, and I was feeling a bit better. I thought maybe I had perhaps jumped the gun on deleting everything, when all of a sudden I got a text message one day. It was from an area code that I live in, asking for me by my full legal first name. Needless to say, I was very confused. I asked who this was. It turns out it was someone who followed me on Reddit and OnlyFans. Here's what his text said. "Hi, it's me, R. I put in so many hours to try and find you. I paid for all your OnlyFans. When you deleted it, I felt like a part of me died inside. I think about you every day." I had no idea how the hell this guy found me. I called my husband, but all he really could do was tell me to be careful and to block this guy. I said okay and did just that. About an hour later, he sent me another message from a different number, listing off my dad's name, my uncle, my husband, and many other people I knew. He then said, "All these people are connected to your number. I'm going to message all of them until you respond. I need you." At this time, I was screenshotting all of this. I was sending it to my husband. As you can imagine, he was really pissed off. He was not one to sit back and let people harass me. He called the number and threatened the guy to leave me alone. Another text came in right after, saying, "You could just talk to me and have some fun. You know, make some money instead of having your husband get all mad." At this point, I was hysterical. I was terrified and also mad at myself for posting any of that at all. I wasn't responding to anything he was saying, and I blocked each number as they came in. He still kept making new ones to send all these texts. My husband was trying to figure out if we knew who this was. I did have some guys subscribe to my OnlyFans that I had gone to school with, so we thought maybe it was one of them trying to mess with me. This guy kept insisting he needed to talk to me, and my husband kept trying to tell him he had the wrong girl, that I wasn't even on OnlyFans, trying to make him question himself. This guy knew exactly who I was, though. He knew all my information. He sent my husband screenshots of my personal Facebook and my private Instagram. I even go by a completely different name on there. My husband threatened he was going to call the police. The man replied he hadn't even done anything wrong or made any threats, so there was nothing they would do. I was literally at home shaking as my husband sent me these screenshots of their messages. I begged him to stop talking to him, but he thought if he could get this guy to say something personal, maybe we could track him down and call the police or something. The guy just wouldn't stop though. He kept messaging everyone saying he wanted to meet up with us and to not be so uptight. I finally had enough and called the non-emergency line to talk to a detective about the situation. I was terrified. My husband owns a personal business, and the guy told us he had Googled that name and found the business address, then traced that to find our personal address as well. Of course, the detective couldn't do much. He did contact the guy and warn him, and had an open report if anything were to happen. I know this might not seem as terrifying to some of you, but it goes to show you how dangerous the internet is. I didn't think I could be tracked down just by a few pictures with all my information hidden, but the internet can definitely be a scary place. All of you out there, be safe and careful, and make sure to use a VPN. As for you, if you happen to hear this, you're a real creep, and I would never want to meet up with you in a million years. Back in 2016, I believe, Dragon Ball Super was coming to America with the English dub. As a lifelong Dragon Ball fan, I was thrilled leading up to its release. The cast and crew of the American version were touring all over the United States. I got tickets to one of the anime conventions they were going to be appearing at. I was so pumped up to meet the voices behind many of my childhood heroes. The convention itself was a general anime convention, and it had a countless number of things to do, but Dragon Ball was definitely the main focus of the event. At least, it felt that way to me. The lines to meet the cast were, of course, super long, and the rooms where they were speaking and answering questions were packed to the brim. As ridiculous as it may sound, it was almost like being at a rock concert. People were screaming and yelling with excitement, myself included. Being that my friends don't really like anime and never really got into Dragon Ball growing up, I attended this convention all by myself. I didn't mind being alone though. There were so many like-minded people in attendance that I would have rather just been there alone in general. If my non-anime friends were there, I feel like I would have felt the need to babysit them the whole time, instead of just letting loose and being myself. At some point in the afternoon, I met a girl and I was instantly head over heels for her. Believe it or not only was she a super Dragon Ball fan like me, but she was dressed like one of the characters from the show, Bulma. If anybody out there is a fan of Dragon Ball, I'm sure you'll know the outfit I'm talking about. The woman at the convention had her exact outfit on, the blue hair, all of that. She told me her name was Jessie. We hit it off and spent the remainder of the convention together. I actually have a picture of me, her, and Sean Shamel, who was the voice actor of Goku on the English dub of the show. Around 9 p.m. or so, she asked me if I wanted to head back to her place, which she said was only about 20 minutes away from the venue. As you can imagine, it took very little convincing to get me to go with her. I was planning on just driving home anyway, so to me this was an awesome way to continue an already amazing night. We got to her house, and I hate to say this, but I felt a little bit uncomfortable. She did not live in a nice neighborhood at all. All the houses were beat up and almost falling apart. Many of the houses on that street were boarded up and condemned even. I was happy that I'd driven my own car and followed her, because the more I looked at these houses, the more I felt like I was ready to just drive home that evening, in case the night didn't go so well. We parked in front of this big brick house that was completely concealed in darkness. I parked on the street in front of the house. She pulled into the driveway and waved for me to follow her to the back door, which I did. We walked in the back door of the house. I remember being completely shocked that anybody could actually live there. This place looked like it had been abandoned for years. I mean, there were even plants growing in some parts. I think I was blinded by my infatuation with this new girl, Jessie. I didn't see any of the red flags around me. Before I could even open my mouth to say anything, she spoke up first and said she needed to use the bathroom. She would be right back out though. I thought it was weird that she didn't bring me into the living room or offer me a seat or anything. I was just standing in this small room with trash everywhere. In this brief moment alone, I was finally starting to come to my senses. I was becoming more aware that something was weird about this. My alarm bells went off just a little bit too late though. I felt a strike to the back of my head, and I fell to the ground. I tried to immediately jump back up, but before I could get to my feet, some guy in a hooded sweatshirt kicked me back down to the ground and demanded I give him my wallet. I handed it over without struggle on my end. My life was far more important than anything in that wallet. The large man shouted to Jessie that he had the wallet. She ran out from the other room, now just wearing a normal shirt and black leggings. They ran out of the house, and I heard the car drive away. I remained on the ground for a little while, in absolute shock of what just happened. I eventually ran to my car and called the police. As I drove away, I was thankful these idiots didn't rob my phone or my car keys from me. I was able to give the police a detailed description of Jessie, since I had a picture of us from the convention. I even remembered the color, make, and model of her car, since I'd followed behind her. It didn't take long. The police were able to track both of them down. Thank God they were both detained. I realized how lucky I was, because it could have ended much worse than it did. It doesn't change the fact that it was still one of the scariest moments of my life. When I was laying on the ground and that man was kicking me, I'd never been more scared before. And that was the last convention of any kind I'd ever gone to. After this nightmare of an evening, I'll probably never attend another one ever again. When I was a child, my family moved to a big old 2-story house with big empty rooms and creaking floorboards. Both of my parents worked at the time, so I was often home alone when I came home from school. One early evening when I came home, the house was completely dark inside. I called out for my mom to see if she was there, and I heard her say something from upstairs. I called her again as I climbed the stairs to see which room she was in. We were decorating at the time, and I didn't know my way around the maze of rooms yet. She was in one of the far ones right down the hall, it seemed. I felt a bit uneasy for some reason, but I figured that was only natural. I rushed forward to see my mom, knowing her presence would calm the fears as a mother's presence always does. Just as I reached for the handle of the door to let myself into the room, though, I heard the front door downstairs open, and my mom called out to me, "Sweetie, are you home?" I jumped back startled and ran back down the stairs to her. As I glanced back to the top of the stairs, I could see the door to the room was now slightly open, and for a brief moment, I could see someone peeking out at me from behind it. I told my mom right away. We went up there to check together, but when we checked, no one was there. This happened when I was in college 4 years ago. I went to a university that was very close to the ocean on the East Coast. I made friends with some people one weekend, and one guy in the group of people I met invited us to go out on his boat with him sometime. He described his boat to many people and was very proud to have it. It sounded like a very expensive sailboat by the way he described it. I'm not really familiar with ocean vehicles myself and haven't ever been on one other than a cruise ship when I was only 11 years old. This guy said his parents had bought it for him. That made sense because he was known to be a spoiled rich kid, I guess. He was a nice guy though, and the thought of cruising around some Sunday afternoon and drinking some beer sounded quite appealing. After that conversation, I saw him around in school, but I didn't really talk to him much. That is, until one day, he approached me in the library and asked me if I still wanted to go sailing. I said sure. That sounded like a lot of fun. He told me the following day he was going to go out on the water, and it would be a perfect opportunity. After a lengthy conversation about how sailing works and him assuring me that it was safe and that he knew what he was doing, I told him I would meet him at the docks the next morning. That night, my roommate asked me what I was doing for the weekend. I told him I made some plans to go sailing. He freaked out on me and told me he really wished that he could go as well. My roommate and I were really good friends, and honestly, it sounded like way more fun if he was to join us. So I invited him to go as well. I was pretty sure the other guy would be cool with this, since he'd invited other people before. The next morning, my roommate and I grabbed some coffee, then went and grabbed some beers from the store to bring along with us on our voyage. We ate some breakfast, then headed over to the docks to meet the guy. We were pretty excited. When we got there, we followed the directions he'd given me and found his boat pretty much right away. It was a huge orange and white sailboat. We stood on the dock next to it admiring it when the guy popped his head up from somewhere inside. He immediately showed a look of concern on his face. He jumped off the side of the boat and onto the dock right next to us. He looked at my roommate, then at myself, and asked, "Who's this?" I told him he was my roommate and he was a cool guy. He'd asked if he could come along, so I told him I didn't think the guy would mind. The guy looked very annoyed, and it was awkward for about a minute or so. The guy kept looking back and forth between us and the boat. He took his hat off and rubbed his head, like he was really stressed out. Eventually he sighed and said it was fine. A few hours later, we were on the boat drinking and having fun. The water was pretty smooth sailing, and the sun was shining brightly in the sky. The guy who invited us had acted off the whole time, though. I figured it was because he was annoyed I'd brought my roommate. After drinking 3 or 4 beers, I felt the courage to ask the guy what was wrong. If he was still pissed off, I'd brought my friend with me. He responded with something along the lines of, "It just kinda ruined my plans, you know?" My roommate chimed in and asked what his plans were. I could tell my roommate thought it was funny. It sounded like the guy really wanted to be alone with me. The guy just looked at him deadpan and said, "Well, because you're here, now I can't kill him." This took me off guard completely. I felt a surge of fear and unbelievable relief hit me at the same time. My roommate and this guy started cracking up. My roommate brushed it off as a joke. I didn't know what to think though. Was this guy serious? He certainly looked dead serious to me. Had I just narrowly avoided being killed, or was his sense of humor just that weird? I believe I got my answer when I went down below deck an hour later to grab another beer from the fridge. Right next to the fridge was this brown swinging door that led to a private bedroom. I was feeling the beer pretty good at this point. Without thinking, I pushed the door open to have a look. Lying at the foot of the bed was this big cinder block, tied around some yellow rope. There was some tape and what looked like a recorder of some sort as well. After seeing that, I felt sick to my stomach. I wanted off this boat as soon as possible. I wanted to go back up and confront the guy. I decided against it though, because I had no idea what this guy was capable of. What seemed like hours and hours more of being with this psycho. We finally made it back to the dock. We said our goodbyes, and on the way back, I told my roommate about what I'd seen down there. He couldn't believe it. I'm pretty damn sure my roommate saved my life that day. I'm not even kidding you. I never saw that guy that invited us on campus ever again after. What he planned for that night, I don't really want to know. This incident happened back in 2014. I had been committed to a psych ward for my own safety. A little background, I'm a woman, and I was 19 at the time this happened. I was coming off 3 years of bipolar medication while at the peak of substance abuse, facilitated by my first year in college. I was going crazy with new adult freedom. One night I had a big mental breakdown, and I was committed for the first time in the adult ward. Previously, I had only been admitted in the minors ward during my adolescence for similar episodes. Within this unit, you had to share a room with the same sex, but weren't given any proper introductions. The facility as a whole wasn't really managed effectively, nor did any of the nurses or doctors seem to care, other than to prescribe and get you out as soon as possible. I was led to the room I would be staying in. The nurse just said to the other lady in the room, "This is your new roommate," then left. The woman appeared to be in her late 40s or early 50s, Hispanic and a little bit taller than I was. She would not keep her gaze off the floor in front of her and didn't say a word or move when I tried to greet her. I noticed she had a tattoo of a cartoon version of the classic Red Devil, but as a baby of some sort. I figured I would just try and leave her to her own business and stick to my area of the room. The first night went as they normally do in a psych ward. A nightly group where my roommate declined to share anything yet again, only staring at the floor and barely moving an inch, while everyone else was lining up to be given their medication before bed. One of the people across the way started banging on their door and screaming. One guy was smiling while banging his bald head against a glass window. Some other guys behind him were screaming and jumping around. The orderlies came and took them away, their screams still lingering through the halls. Having been in psych wards before, I was not surprised by out-of-the-ordinary behavior, like yelling or fights starting, but this was something completely different to me. I was with disturbed adults now, people who had years of illnesses deteriorating their mind, not just angry little kids anymore. I actually felt scared for the first time because of the high level of unpredictability with these people. I knew I wasn't all there in the head either, but these people had me anxious and made it difficult to try and get any rest that night. You know the feeling of being awake but you haven't opened your eyes yet? The moment when you're barely waking up and everything is still in this fuzzy state of conscious. I was in that state later that night. I felt like I was waking up, as if something was forcing me awake, yet I was still so tired. I wasn't opening my eyes yet. The more I came to, though, I began to feel a pressure on my forehead, and I could sense a ton of sweat dripping on my face. I opened my eyes, only to find my roommate standing over my bed, staring me in the eye. She had one hand on my forehead and the other in a balled-up fist against her chest. She spoke in what I assumed to be tongues. I looked into her eyes, and they were blank and vacant, empty of any emotion at all. She started whispering gibberish faster and getting louder. I was paralyzed at this moment, not sure what to do or what this woman would do if I were to do anything. There was only us in this room, and the nurse's station was all the way at the end of the hall. She started wiping the sweat off my forehead with her hand, while still speaking fast and erratically. I wasn't sure what she planned on doing next. She then put her hands around my throat. At this point, she started screaming while shaking me. That was not long before our nurse rushed in and took her off me. The nurse seemed more irritated she had to get up at all and do her job, rather than being concerned about how I was doing or feeling. She escorted the woman out and said not to worry and just go back to sleep. I don't know how I managed to fall back asleep that night. I assumed the woman got transferred to a more severe ward because I didn't see her again the next day. I was luckily able to leave later that same day. This incident has since been a reminder for me to never go back and to manage my mental well-being better, because while I do have some issues, I could be in a far worse state of mind. I still wake up some nights with lingering anxiety and have to calm myself down to go back to sleep. I never want to go back to a ward in my entire life to experience this again, or perhaps something far worse. I'm a 14-year-old girl from Ireland. A few months ago, before my family moved houses, we lived in a kind of bad neighborhood where a lot of crime took place. One day, I traveled by train to get to my cousin's house, as the journey would be far too long on foot. I had to be there at a certain time. I scanned my ticket, sat down, and began reading a book I had brought with me. From somewhere nearby, though, I started to hear these strange sobbing sounds. Whoever this was panting, as though they were having an anxiety attack. I tried to ignore it, but it got worse and worse. Eventually, I looked up and saw a young woman who looked to be in her early to late 20s, crying with her head in her hands. I immediately got up and asked if she was all right. She didn't get up or anything, she just looked at me. I remembered the petrified look on her face to this very day. Her eyes were full of tears, and she was shaking as well. I was wondering why the hell everyone else on the train was just sitting there letting this happen, because apart from passengers with headphones in their ears, they could all hear her. She never answered me. After we locked eyes, she abruptly sprinted to another seat. She began staring at the ground with her long hair falling over her shoulders and face. I was worried that I had upset her even more and assumed she just wanted to be left alone. Whatever was wrong with her was clearly a private matter. I sat back down and tried to begin reading again, but I couldn't take my mind off of what just happened. It honestly made me shiver, to the point where I became paranoid for the rest of the ride. After the next 2 stops, I looked around since I didn't hear her crying anymore. She was gone, and I assumed she had gotten off. The next stop was mine. As I began walking to my cousin's house, I kept thinking about that woman I had encountered, wishing I had acted a bit differently. The next day, after I got back home, I was scrolling through my news feed when I came across an article about a 32-year-old journalist named Jennifer. She'd been found dead and mutilated just 2 streets away from the train station. I saw a picture of her, and I almost dropped my phone. I recognized her face and hair. There was a graphic censored image of her body. According to the story, her body was found gutted and soaked in blood, with her clothes torn to shreds. Her innards had been strewn about by her dismembered corpse. It looked as though she had been dead for quite a while. This made me sick. I wished I had never clicked on that story. Later that night, I began to see many more bigger news networks covering it. Last I heard, they never found out who did it. Apparently, she had been sexually assaulted before being killed. An anonymous witness later told police he had seen her crying on the train. I felt extremely sorry for this poor girl, for the horrific account of agony she must have gone through. She must have had some idea of what was going to happen to her for her to be crying like that on the train. It still shakes me to my core thinking back on it. I told my mother and she reported what I'd seen to the police. She never wanted me to take the train again after. My cousin told me that before anyone else arrived at her house that night and I came over, she had seen a suspicious-looking man. He was wearing worn-out jeans and a black hoodie, slowly walking back and forth past her house. She didn't see his face and didn't think much of it at the time. Now, though, after we found out what happened, she became traumatized too and didn't go out for weeks afterward, not even to go to school. I hope that woman rests in peace and that her family finds justice one day. I'll never look or think of a train in the same way ever again. I entered the student parking lot at my college campus. As I got out of my car, I saw a man standing a few cars away. I started walking, and the man called out to me, "Hey, remember me?" I said no, I don't, with a big smile. He replied back, "I remember you from high school. We were in Miss Smith's class." I never had a Miss Smith in high school, and I'm damn sure I would have remembered this guy if he was in my class, since me and my classmates had been together for all 4 years in high school. I told him sorry and I had to go. Then he asked what high school I went to. I told him and he swore he knew me again. I said I didn't recognize him. He then asked me for a ride to his class and said that it started at 9:15. My college classes started on the hour and all my inner warning lights were going off right now. I was getting extremely weirded out by this guy. I said that I couldn't and I had to go to class right away. I was walking away when he said out loud to me, "Guess I can't pull the wool over your eyes, huh?" A week later, the college campus newsletter said a man robbed a student at knife point. The student had given him a ride. The student had been asked the very same questions by the man as well. This happened to me in my early 20s, and as a direct result of this experience, I've now developed a strong fear and mistrust of the opposite sex. For that reason, I'll be keeping my identity anonymous. It happened one night when I was on my way home from work. I got off the train at my usual station, and I was walking down the street in the direction of my home. I had my earbuds in and was listening to music. It was just an ordinary night, really. As I was walking, I sensed a presence behind me, so naturally I glanced backward. I guessed that I might have been in someone's way or something. I looked back to see a man on a bicycle. He was wearing a surgical mask, so I couldn't see his face very clearly. He looked very young, though. When I heard his voice, I guessed he was about the same age as me. He called out, something along the lines of, "Hey, when I saw you, I knew I just had to stop and talk to you. You are so my type. Are you free right now?" Realizing this guy was just trying to hit on me, I pretended I couldn't hear anything over my music. I just kept hoping he would leave me alone. "Hey, can you hear me or are you busy? Why is that? Why don't you just give me your contact information?" "I won't even contact you." "Why the hell do you want my number then?" I wondered. I realized this creep was not going to just get the hint, so I decided to go a little stronger. I made a big gesture of turning my head away from him and upped my pace as well. He did freak out a bit, but it only took me another 3 or 4 minutes to get home. I just focused on what I wanted to do when I got in. I told myself soon I would be sitting on my sofa watching a movie behind locked doors. I didn't look back. I just kept walking to get to my place. I had to go along some busier streets and some quieter ones. When I turned off to head down the quieter street, I noticed something suddenly coming up from behind me. I heard some kind of clanking sound. It sounded like metal rubbing against metal. I turned around to see what was coming. I saw amidst the darkness of the night, that guy wearing a surgical mask coming right at me on his bicycle. I thought our brief and horrible exchange was over, but it seemed pretty clear to me he had been following me the entire time. My first thought was a really strange one. Even if I ran home as fast as I could, he would still catch me. It was true, he did have a bike. With that thought came a kind of internal avalanche of fear. I was confused and scared. I wanted nothing more than to be off these dark streets. I remembered there was a coin laundromat nearby that I sometimes used. I figured I could get there and into the light in about 10 seconds. There might be people there too if I was lucky enough to find someone in the laundromat. Then that guy would surely go away. If not, I could lock the door from the inside if I had to, then call the police. I turned around and started running. The metal clanking sound was getting louder. I guess that was probably the sound of the pedals on his worn-out bike. I knew without turning around that meant he must be pedaling faster in pursuit of me. I threw open the door to the laundromat and jumped inside without the creep catching me. Of course, no one was in there. There were no other customers, just my luck. I was having that sort of night. I locked the door behind me. I knew how to lock the door because I'd helped the owner with it before. I headed right to the back of the room. I was shaking with fear and breathing heavily. I grabbed my phone. As I was frantically trying to unlock it, I saw the shadow appear in the front door outside. The guy who was following me had arrived. He dropped his bike to the ground and started trying to open the door. He realized I'd locked it, and this angered him a whole lot. "Hey, open the door. Come on, just open it. Come on, it's not like I'm gonna do anything to you. I won't do anything, okay? Just give me your number. I won't even contact you, but if you just give it to me, I'll go away." He just kept on saying stuff like that. I remember because he said he wanted my number but wouldn't contact me. Now he was saying to open the door. The way he was double speaking was really creepy to me. It was like his true intentions were slipping out when he was getting frustrated. I wondered what more would happen to me if he got even more angry. He started pounding on the door with clenched fists and shaking the handle. The entire door was shaking in the frame. The door was primarily made out of glass, so I wasn't sure how much of a beating it could really take. I was absolutely terrified what was going to happen to me if that man managed to get in. I couldn't just stand there cowering and waiting for him to get inside. I yelled at him and told him I'd called the police and they would be here any minute. I told him he was an idiot and he'd better stop right now. He stopped banging on the door and calmly dropped his arms down to his sides. He looked me in the eyes, and I could tell he hated me in that moment. I think I'd really upset his ego by calling him stupid. He then pointed at me and said he was going to kill me. He turned and kept muttering something, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. He picked up his bike and left. I couldn't move for 10 minutes. I had to, though, when an actual customer came to use the laundromat. I unlocked the door with my trembling hands and called the police. I made sure someone stayed with me on the phone until I got home. I got home safely that night. I hated that night at home, though, because that horrible experience happened on a road I regularly used to get home. It led to a lot of fear and negativity during my commutes to work. It really ruined my life. In order to get back to being myself again, I had to move. I had to get away. I couldn't live each day, wondering if I would run into that man again. Thankfully, I never did, but it still scares me to this day, knowing that he could still be out there somewhere.